Hey, everybody, welcome into another free agent PFF reaction video. And of course, the big news of today is Tom Brady declaring officially via Instagram, which is the way you break news in 2020, that he's going to be departing from the Patriots. He will be playing somewhere else in 2020. So, of course, that brings up the question, who should he be playing for? Eric, what do you think? Where's the best destination for Brady?
I said this yesterday. I still think it's true, and the markets indicate that this is probably the case as well. But I think Tampa Bay for him, there's so many reasons why Tampa Bay would be preferred over a team like the Los Angeles Chargers, for example. That division is a little bit weaker. The NFC is a little bit weaker. On balance, you have great receivers. You have a really good head coach who, he hasn't changed his scheme for lesser quarterbacks, but certainly would for Tom Brady, I think, to an extent. And there's no state income tax in Florida. So there's just a lot of things that, I think from the perspective of Tom Brady, look really good there. Plus TB, Tampa Bay. Come
on. Well, Eric, I may agree with you, but for different reasons. I just think it's a better team all the way around in terms of the talent surrounding Tom Brady. There's no doubt that for any quarterback, the older you get in this league, the better you have to be around the quarterback position. I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offer Tom Brady an opportunity to win a championship right away, not simply because he has talented receivers like Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, but I think the coaching of Bruce Arians, no risk it, no biscuit, throw the ball down the field. Many people believe that part of the game has left Tom Brady. I don't subscribe to that theory. We know that Tampa led the league in average depth of target last year at 10.9 yards per pass attempt. Tom ranked 27, but that's because he wasn't throwing it to guys like Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. If you give him someone who can stretch the field, Tom Brady can still drive the ball down the field. I think this would throw away and throw off a lot of those misnomers that people are prescribing to him. And I think we'll see that he's still got plenty of game left.
So I agree with you 100% on that part. I think Tom Brady's demise last year was dramatically overstated. His box score numbers are way down, but he was still the number 10 graded quarterback at PFF. And then when you throw on the tape, all the problems basically stem from the fact that there were no receivers getting open. So definitely Tampa Bay makes a ton of sense there. The team that I think makes the most sense, though, is the Indianapolis Colts. I know they're being heavily linked to Phillip Rivers, but all the reasons that is true hold true for Tom Brady as well. They have a great offensive line to put in front of Brady. They're a little bit light in terms of receiving weapons. You've got T.Y. Hilton and not an awful lot beyond that. But the draft is still upcoming. I think they could do enough to convince Tom Brady that they will have weapons to play with. And Frank Reich is one of the better offensive minds in the NFL. The scheme is excellent there. So I think a lot of the things that ring true for other teams are an even better fit in Indianapolis. And I don't think he'd be fighting the scheme as much as he would be in Tampa Bay with Bruce Arians.
Well, you got to have the receivers, though. I think that's where the Colts may take a step back, even behind a team like the Chargers, certainly behind a team like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think he's got to consider heavily after the season he went through in New England in 2019, where he's looking around for people who could read coverages, people who could get open and get separation. I think he's going to lean heavily towards the talent on the roster and the talent surrounding him in the huddle after what he went through in 2019.
Well, not only that, but the Colts yesterday traded the 13th overall pick in the draft, which could have been a pick to take Henry Ruggs or CeeDee Lamb or one of those top receivers. They traded that for DeForest Buckner. And so as far as being able to, build a receiving core, you're picking now in the 40s, which is a little bit more speculative. And I think Brady would probably take a little less seriously than some of the weapons that they have in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. What about, let's focus on the New England side of this thing. They now need to replace Tom Brady with no obvious succession plan in the building in terms of Jarrett Stidham, Cody Kessler. Neither of those guys is going to be the answer, not even in 2020, let alone beyond that. What is the best option for the Patriots when it comes to a new quarterback this year and beyond, Solomon?
First of all, we have to look at what Bill Belichick, what are some of the things that he values in a quarterback. It's got to be someone who's got a tremendous bandwidth in terms of processing information, someone who can quickly learn the offense, who's going to come from the outside, learn their offense, be able to run the operation from the line of scrimmage, get everyone aligned, use shifts in motion to dictate terms to the defense and decipher coverages. There's a high learning curve. He's got to have someone who's won a lot of games. He's not going to get Teddy Bridgewater. I think Andy Dalton is a good fit. That's what I'm hearing from some circles. Andy Dalton has won 70 games in 9 seasons in the National Football League and has led his team to the postseason 5 times in those 9 seasons. So I believe that Belichick could get maybe more out of Andy Dalton than what we've seen in Cincinnati. I think he's a really good fit because he brings mobility, a high learning curve, throws the ball with good accuracy, particularly with intermediate throws. I think he gives them at least a chance to be competitive in 2020, if not win games. This is still a division that can be had by the Patriots.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you, Solly. That division is, even though the Bills did get stronger yesterday by acquiring Stephon Diggs, that's still not a great division, top to bottom. Belichick's only been through this, I think, once, in Cleveland. He let Bernie Kosar go, and he acquired Vinny Testaverde, who had, worn out his welcome, a former number 1 pick. And while I do agree with you that Dalton is the best option for them, there is a former number 1 overall pick that today, wore out his welcome with the Carolina Panthers, and that's Cam Newton. So there could be a situation where, Belichick, wants to, kick the tires with him. But I agree. I think Dalton's probably the safer option, and hence the one that he's more likely to go with. Although the betting markets right now, at least one place that I've looked, has Jared Stidham at plus 200 as the prohibitive favorite in that spot.
No. That's kind of where I'm going with this, right? I just don't think the Patriots have a viable option to be, a quality starter in 2020. I think the musical chairs the music has stopped spinning at this point. There's almost nobody left for the Patriots to jump on and be contenders in 2020, at which point let's start blowing this thing up and look for 2021. The Patriots with Bill Belichick are one of the few teams in the NFL that have the kind of, money in the bank to be able to strip this thing for parts, get some serious capital to attack Trevor Lawrence at the top of the next draft or whoever it emerges being. We didn't see a Joe Burrow coming this time a year ago. Whatever, get that number 1 overall pick or the ammunition to get that number 1 overall pick, and let's rebuild this thing from the ground up and attack a new dynasty in a year's time.
Hey, Steve, I'm sorry. Hey, Sam, you know what? I think Tom Brady believes that maybe they were already tanking going back to the 2019 season, which is why he wanted out. I think some of the things lost in the narrative is that Tom Brady is the one that said goodbye. And we know that simply by the remarks given by the owner, Mr. Bob Kraft. But I think the Patriots might even lean. If Dalton's not a good option for them, don't be surprised to see the Patriots maybe go back to a Jacoby Brissett, someone who knows the operation, someone that feels very comfortable with. Even if they do decide to tank and maybe sort of lobby for Trevor Lawrence or the next great quarterback, they could still be competitive in 2020 with a Jacoby Brissett or maybe with young Stidham. So we know that Belichick is not going to want to tank games. He's going to want to be as competitive as he possibly can and turn away from the narrative that he can't win without Tom Brady.
Jacoby Brissett being a career bridge quarterback certainly would be something, wouldn't it?
That's right.
And that's the danger, I think, for them, is that they get trapped now in this situation that the Vikings often find themselves in, where they're just perpetually competitive, but never have the quarterback good enough to actually get beyond that and go back to winning championships. If you lose a Tom Brady, he will take you there every single year, and you get, endless sequences of Jacoby Brissett's and whoever else it is. That'll probably be enough to get you to 500 every year, but will it ever get you beyond that? That would be my concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the tricky part when you sign a Devin McCourty yesterday, you franchise tag Joe Thuney. Some of your draft picks a season ago were certainly to help Brady. N'Keal Harry, for example, Mohamed Sanu, you traded a second-round pick for, and now the key, the fulcrum, leaves, and those aren't rebuild players. So it'll be interesting to see what they end up doing. From here on out.
So we mentioned it a minute ago. Cam Newton has been granted permission to seek a trade. Although, as he points out, he didn't ask for permission. They basically drove him to that. But where's this most sensible destination for Cam Newton? Who should he be picking up the phone to try and manufacture this trade, Eric?
I think it's the Chicago Bears. Yesterday, we were a little bit overzealous when, they said, when they said Teddy Bridgewater was going to go to the Bears. And one of the things that I thought, was they were, it was a good spot because Nagy does a terrific job of scheming open receivers. And they have some players. Cam was relatively effective in Norv Turner's offense, throwing the ball underneath to, DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel and obviously Christian McCaffrey. And in Chicago, they have the downfield threat in Allen Robinson, but they also have underneath players in Anthony Miller. Now they got Jimmy Graham, which is just, going to be somebody that's, going to be underneath a lot. And then obviously Tariq Cohen and Cordell Patterson as guys that sort of are, players that are a little bit, more underneath, do things after the catch. And I think that that's a good situation for Chicago, and his accuracy issues are one thing, but they've had accuracy issues in Chicago since they moved up to pick Trubisky with the second pick in the 2017 draft. So I think it's an upgrade at least for them, and it gives Cam a chance to still be a starter.
Eric, I looked high and low and tried to find a good landing spot for Cam Newton, and I couldn't get beyond the Chicago Bears. In fact, I see it as the only maybe spot where he could come in and be a starter right away in the 2020 season. That would be a good fit for the way that he likes to play the game. I think whatever team that brings in Cam Newton, they're going to have to maybe tailor the offense to his unique talents, to his unique playing style. There are a lot of NFL coaches who really do want a quarterback that offers greater mobility, that are more pliable and more versatile in terms of what you can do with an offense. Matt Nagy is one of those coaches. Certainly Cam is an upgrade from Mitchell Trubisky. Now, Cam's going to still have to continue to improve on his accuracy, his overall completion percentage. He's going to be throwing to, I think, better weapons than those that he had in Carolina in recent years. I see the Bears as not only the best landing spot, but one might say maybe the only landing spot for Cam Newton as a starting quarterback in 2020.
Yeah, I think the big concern with the Bears is, do they have the salary cap space to make that kind of thing happen? They just gave up a ton of it for Robert Quinn, which we'll get to in a minute. And they were already, not exactly overburdened with salary cap space. So I worry if they have the ammo to make that happen.
Yeah, it's going to be, we could talk about the Robert Quinn deal because that's one of my dislikes. When you're talking about $10 million a year, $50 million for 5 years, we know that money could have been allocated elsewhere. They end up cutting a former first-round pick, and he only counted $13.5 million towards the cap in Leonard Floyd, who I think was still an ascending player. We're talking about Robert Quinn, who did have 11.5 sacks 1 year ago in Dallas, but I see Robert Quinn more as a rotational pass rush guy, not an every down defensive end at this stage of his career. I believe that those dollars could have been better used. And maybe if they had another day and they knew that Cam Newton was an option, maybe they would have rethought it all.
Maybe. My thing with Cam Newton, I think for the same reason that Brady would be a good fit, I think the Indianapolis Colts would be a great fit for Cam Newton. I think if it's down to him, he should be calling up teams like the Colts and trying to make that happen. My question for those teams, though, is why? Why would you be in the Cam Newton sweepstakes? Because the last time he had an overall PFF grade north of 71 was that 2015 season. Now, granted, that 2015 season was an MVP caliber year. It was phenomenal, but it's looking more and more like the stars just aligned, and this is this incredible outlier to his career. Then that is sort of his potential that is there to be untapped or to be tapped and gotten out of him. I just don't know that player exists anymore. And there's better options for almost every other team out there that needs a quarterback, the ones that you don't need to trade to make happen. So I think for Cam Newton, there's a bunch of teams out there that make some sense to try and pick up the phone for. I'm just not sure why they would be listening on the other end that hard.
Yeah, I think that's the issue is that, the team that's going to want Newton is going to be chasing the high-end variance, and Chicago being a team that just 2 seasons ago had really brilliant defense and a good enough quarterback to get to 12-4, that might be the team that convinces themselves that if they get Cam at his best, they can capitalize on it.
Then the only other team from a schematic point of view that makes some sense to me is Tampa Bay. We keep talking about how nobody is this schematic fit for this Bruce Arians offense. Jameis is, and he doesn't want any part of Jameis. Cam Newton is as well, but obviously you'd have to execute a trade within the division for that to happen, and that feels pretty unlikely. So let's assume Cam is out of Carolina at some point. It looks like he's going to get replaced by Teddy Bridgewater. Reports are that they're working on a 3-year, $60 million deal for Teddy Bridgewater. Bridgewater got a little run of starting games last season with the Saints, earned a 73 PFF grade, which is good enough to place him kind of 20th in the PFF rankings if you extrapolate that out over the season. Do we like or dislike this deal, Solomon?
I like the deal. I really do. And I know people are going to look at the average depth of target for Teddy Bridgewater and the Saints offense 1 year ago. And what people don't realize is that Drew Brees' numbers were quite similar. When you think about what the Saints had to offer on the perimeter, they didn't have the deep threat. We all know that Michael Thomas is an intermediate threat. He's going to catch a high percentage of those throws on slant routes and over the intermediate part of the field. Didn't really have the dynamic ability to go down the field over the last year or two, even for the Saints. I think Bridgewater can push the ball down the field. We know he has an arm good enough to do that. If given the opportunity, yes, he could fit in a Panthers offense that many of us don't even know what it's going to look like with Matt Rule coming over to the pro level. He's going to design an offense. We know that Joe Brady is the offensive coordinator. So one might say that this move might have been made simply because of Joe Brady and him suggesting that, look, we're going to run the system that the Saints have run. And we know that Ted Bridgewater knows the nomenclature. He knows the system. So I believe that this is part of that Joe Brady connection. And that's the reason why I think Teddy Bridgewater will be a good fit for the Panthers, even though there's so much that we don't know.
Yeah, Solomon, that's a great point. I think even doubling down on the Brady thing, I mean, we look at Joe Burrow. Burrow's a player that a season ago, none of us really had on the radar in terms of a first-round pick, let alone the first overall pick. He's somebody whose arm strength at times, much like Bridgewater's, has been questioned. And I like the receivers and Brady and the way that they sort of mesh with Bridgewater. DJ Moore is a terrific receiver at catching some of the routes that Bridgewater likes to throw, some of the shallow crossers and things like that. They do lose Greg Olsen, which is a loss for them, but McCaffrey's a player that out of the backfield I think can be extremely explosive with Bridgewater throwing those types of passes. So I think this is, part of me thinks that Carolina is rebuilding and this is sort of a bridge, but if they're not, then, this is a decent move, I think, both for Bridgewater and for the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, I think this is a significant rebuild job for Carolina. And I think from their point of view, it makes a ton of sense. Bridgewater would be familiar with a lot of the concepts. He is a good enough quarterback to start and be that bridge guy. For Bridgewater's point of view, though, it kind of feels like he could do better. I think he's earned himself a starting job again after the run he had with the Saints this season. He kind of proved to everybody that he could be a quality quarterback again after the devastating knee injury that he had with the Minnesota Vikings. It was a rough start to his starting stint this season with the Saints, but as the weeks went on, something changed in him around about that Tampa Bay game. We saw him actually start to play the game differently, trust what he was seeing a bit more, target the ball deeper down the field, actually make some big time throws in those final few weeks that he just wasn't doing in the first couple while he got his feet under him again. So for Teddy, I would be trying to go to a team like Chicago that isn't in the middle or at the start of a giant rebuilding job. I think the attraction is the coaches, but I wonder if anything else is going to be around him at the point where he wants to be playing his best football.
But here's what I'm looking at here. For one, Matt Rule doesn't have a guy, right? He's coming up from college to the pro game. He's looking for a quarterback that's going to be his guy. And I think the conversation would have had to have been had, hey, you're my guy because you're Joe Brady's guy. And the reason why Joe Brady is signing off, because Teddy Bridgewater was much loved in that New Orleans Saints locker room, not just among the coaching staff with Sean Payton, but many of those other players. He's got that kind of charismatic personality about him. And so I think for the coach and the coordinator there in Carolina, Teddy Bridgewater is that guy. And I think anytime you're a quarterback and you hear a coordinator and a coach tell you in their first run at this that you are going to be our guy and we're going to build it around some of the things you're already familiar with, that you learned from Sean Payton, that Joe Brady learned from Sean Payton, I think that's a tremendous upside for him to play his way over the next couple of years into an even bigger contract. And oh, by the way, if you said to Teddy Bridgewater, we're thinking about using our first-round pick on a wide receiver who I coached at LSU by the name of Justin Jefferson, we're going to put him in the slot. He's a guy that already knows our system as well. If I'm Teddy Bridgewater, I'm buying everything they're selling.
Well, and especially given the situation Bridgewater was in the first time that he had his turn at the dish with the Minnesota Vikings, with poor tackles, Laquan Treadwell being drafted in the first round and not working out. Also, Mike Wallace being a bad fit for him. Like, just having the idea of an offense that's built around him and built to accentuate his strengths must be very comforting for him. And so I do agree with Sam that he might have been able to do better, but I still think he'll probably make the most of this opportunity.
Yeah, I could be persuaded to change my mind a little bit if they can convince him, or if they are, in fact, determined that this is a shorter rebuild than it feels. It just feels, the entire franchise essentially being blown up and started over from scratch, including front office, including infrastructure. It feels like it's a longer-term rebuild. But if they think, hey, you're going to be our guy, we're going to put weapons around you quickly and build this whole thing in a year or two, then I could buy that it's a pretty good move for Teddy, because he becomes the center of this new regime there, and that definitely works.
Well, absolutely. And I think that's really the key, is about what that conversation was like. Are you going to keep a Christian McCaffrey, right? What else are we doing on offense? And I think as we go through this free agency period and as we enter the draft, I think that's going to tell us maybe a little bit more about where the Carolina Panthers are. Are they a full rebuild, or is it just a retool and let's go?
All right, let's finish this up with the Robert Quinn analysis. We already touched on this a little bit before, but let's set the stage. Robert Quinn last season, overall PFF grade of 69, actually 68.5. That ranked 48th among edge rushers. The Bears gave him what looks an awful lot like the Danielle Hunter contract. Now, it's a little bit less guaranteed money than Danielle Hunter, but Robert Quinn would appear to be significantly less of a player than Danielle Hunter. So, Eric, like or dislike this deal, as if I need to ask?
Yeah, I'm a dislike in this situation. The problem is, I think Chicago did not learn their lesson from a season ago, which is that defense is great to have, but it's not something you go out of your way to have in lieu of an offense, right? And then we talked about their cap space. Now, this doesn't affect their cap space that much because they got rid of Leonard Floyd, but there's a couple of issues with this as well as far as scheme. I mean, Quinn's never been a guy who's been all that successful standing up. And I know the distinction between a 3-4 and a 4-3 in the NFL is relatively minimal now, but, from a schematic standpoint, but from the individual player standpoint, he struggled when he was in LA and he was asked to stand up. He struggled when he was in Miami and he was asked to stand up. And he had a rebirth of sorts last year in Dallas, with his hand in the grass. The Bears run a 3-4, and he's going to be asked to rush standing up. And unless they make changes for him, he might not be that effective, and he might regress even more than he was going to regress in the first place.
Literally, the first thing I did as soon as I saw they made this deal was fire up some tape of Leonard Floyd and figure out just how much they were using him to stand up and how much they let him put his hand in the ground for exactly what you're saying. I think, look, the distinction between 3-4 and 4-3 for the edge rushers has become blurred from an alignment point of view, right? Because everybody is essentially playing the same techniques along the defensive front, because everybody's playing nickel 75% of their snaps now. So they're in the same spot along the line of scrimmage, but the actual mechanics difference between being able to put your hand in the ground and, coil to explode off the line versus that 2-point stance that you get in, Eric, for your little starter, that is significant, right? Particularly with guys like Robert Quinn, who always won through speed to the outside. If they don't let him do that, he is not going to be near the same player. And if you look at his PFF grades through the years, we're talking about like a 10 grading point difference between when he's allowed to be hand in the ground edge rusher versus a stand-up linebacker. And if they don't embrace that and legitimately let him do that, because that's, I don't want to say it's all he can do, but he's definitely better doing that, then I think this is a bad move.
No, you're right. That's all he can do. It's okay. you can say that. And, I've already mentioned in terms of this as a dislike for me, I think it's clearly outweighed, and much to the point that both you and Eric made, Sam, in terms of, being an edge rusher and being able to stand up as opposed to put your hand in the ground. Typically, those guys who could do both, the reason why you stand the guy up is because you want the quarterback to slide the line to that edge rusher, but then you want to be able to drop him in coverage where he can still be effective in that phase of the defense. Well, that's not Robert Quinn's game. He is an edge rusher only. He's not effective dropping into coverage. And so the real key is the ability to be able to have some versatility at that position. And Robert Quinn does not give that to you. And so that's why, for me, this is a dislike. I think it's overweighted, $30 million guaranteed for someone who hasn't been consistently productive over the recent years, even though he was last year. For me, it's just a little bit outweighed. He's better off, I think, in a rotation of edge rushers if you want to send fresh bodies at the quarterback as the game winds down. But if you're talking about 65 snaps each and every week and still be productive, I'm not seeing that as part of his game as a 31-year-old edge rusher.
And I think, unfortunately, in that defense, historically, they have done less of that rotational type player. Yeah. Their interior players are good enough as well where they play a lot. And so there's not that situation where you have three edge players on the field at once, where they create advantageous spots for, one or two of them at a time. So I have a fear here, if I'm a Bears fan, that they're going to line him up for 50 to 70 snaps a game and say, get after the quarterback. We're going to require you to be a bookend to Khalil Mack here. And if you are a Bears fan, that's troubling, considering the issues that you have offensively. You might not even get that many opportunities to rush the passer in high leverage situations, and he might not perform that well in it.
Right. The good news is when you look at the tape, there were snaps where the Bears lined them both up on the same side. One guy was allowed to have his hand on the ground. The other guy was the stand-up edge rusher outside him. There are ways to manufacture it so that Robert Quinn is always the guy with his hand in the ground. But that's a lot of work to go to ensure that the guy you just gave a ton of money to is as effective as he can possibly be. And I don't know if you want that kind of headache on a weekly basis. So, I think we're universal across the board. Do not like this deal. Anyway, that'll do it for our 1 p.m. edition of the Free Agent Live wrap-up of PFF. Hope you guys enjoyed listening. We will be with you later in the day.